Well, this is so cool. You came for this, and I'm really honored that you showed up, and it's been good talking to you before and leading up to this. So we have some more. Okay, got the crew coming. So I know you're super involved in different aspects of the forestry and forest entrepreneurship, and you're both coming from different angles. One is you're at Cal Poly and you've got your own business, so I don't feel super qualified to give you a proper introduction, so I'm going to leave it to you to do that. And the intention of this is just a conversation. I was like, hey, nothing to prepare for. And we have a variety of businesses here, and if it would be helpful to know what they're doing, then we could do that real quickly.
Yeah.
Would that be good? Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
Okay, and then we'll do introductions, and then we'll dig into it. And if you could keep it really short, just your name and your business and what general field you're doing would be helpful.
I'm Joe Snipes, I'm Forescapes, and we do mainly field production.
James Brown, my father, we do Brown Tree Solutions, also trying to do field production and tree service.
Yeah.
Cool.
Kristen Ringerhoff, the Soil Builders, working with soil health and mycology and how that impacts.
Joey Croft, I work as an independent contractor in cone collection, climate construction, and research planning.
Jeff Grief, my business is Plumas Wood Fiber. What I'm trying to do is to set up a processing facility up in Quincy, California, processing biomass into a substitute for peat moss for the horticultural industry. The goal is to process as much biomass as we can to help clean out forests. The horticultural industry wants a substitute for peat moss for various reasons. It just makes sense that we try to use our biomass to supply their needs. So I'm trying to set up a facility.
I'm Erin Kasonovich. I'm with the Forest Reciprocity Group, and we're trying to set up a post-control manufacturing primary production plant. And on a site, and probably in Leggett, and also we're working towards doing in the woods processing.
Yes, I'm Bodie Harnish. I'm also with the Forest Reciprocity Group. Yeah, so focused mostly on ground wood utilization.
I'm Ruby. Oh, go ahead, Rashawn.
Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Rashawn Raymond, and I'm in the insurance industry. We have a lot of clients that have trees that need to be removed. They've had to go to the California Fair Plan because they're in a fire zone. And of course, if you live anywhere in Northern California, you're in an urban forest.
And I'm Ruby. I'm here with Robert, co-facilitating the training this weekend, and have a background in cone collection and regenerative forestry.
And we have some guests over there.
I'm a student studying environmental science. I'm Faye. I'm in forestry, just a student right now, but I hope to open my own forestry preschool.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm also a student. I'm going to be studying forestry restoration at Cal Poly.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm Erin Kelly. So I'm the chair and a professor at Cal Poly in forestry. It's actually called the Forestry, Fire, and Rangeland Management Department. And so when I am teaching, because I'm the chair, I'm mostly I describe it as herding cats. It's herding other professors, doing schedules and stuff. But when I teach, I mostly teach economics, forest economics, and policy classes. I'm also an RPF, so I'm a registered professional forester, and I help students, prepare for the RPF exam. And yeah, I'm somewhat knowledgeable about things in terms of how you think about economics and forestry. So I'm really interested. I tend to focus on either like kind of traditional timber products in my classes, or what I would consider new markets, which are more kind of carbon markets. So I'm really excited to talk about like non-timber forest products, which it sounds like a lot of folks are interested in, or like restoration forestry, which I think has a lot of promise. So yeah, nice to meet you.
My name is George Schmidbauer. I work as business development manager for sort of unformally named the Schmidbauer group of companies, which they're all separate brands, but 3 sawmills in Northern California, Schmidbauer Lumber in downtown Eureka, North Fork Lumber out in Corval, and Trinity River Lumber in Weaverville. It's been a multi-generational family business that I'm fortunate to be stepping into. Before that, I worked in affordable housing development and construction management, with sort of the goal of seeing where our lumber products were going and then working back up the supply chain. For the past year, but really 6 months, that business development role has led me towards mass timber as sort of the next generation of value-added wood products for our region. And so the past 6 months, I've been doing R&D and sort of coming out of R&D right now into some pilot production of mass timber, and just been really like in the weeds, focused on starting this business, and which is different than what everyone else is doing. So it'll be fun to learn from you guys and see how, because it all connects. And yeah, I'm definitely coming with a very specific manufacturing focus where we've never really done much forestry in-house. We just procure logs, and we're more of a manufacturing specialty for lumber production.
Can I kick it off with the first question? What's mass timber?
Mass timber is a product category, sort of a newish term that encapsulates new and old products. Like the older products would be glulam. It's a glue laminated timber, which are just big beams that you see. Usually they're exposed to support roofs in large spanning buildings. And then the new age products are more panels, where you like see a cross laminated timber, CLT, dowel laminated timber, DLT, there's a few others, nail laminated timber. But essentially you're taking dimensional lumber, like 2x6, 2x4, and laminating either with adhesives or dowels or nails into large panels, sort of like this, but it's more like 6 to 12 inches deep and 60 foot long and 10 feet wide. And these panels are prefabricated and pre-engineered to go into large commercial building projects. It could be a house, but typically like the market that can take on those costs are larger projects to replace steel and concrete structural materials, which have much higher embodied carbon in the production. So it's really a sustainability movement. The architects have been driving it in North America, where this has been standard practice in Europe for the past 30, 40 years. But in North America and California, where we have a lot of climate initiatives, the architects have seen this and realized, oh, we can start replacing big steel and concrete structures with wood. That's going to dramatically reduce the embodied carbon and associated environmental impacts of building. And so yeah, the codes have updated in the US, which has been the first hurdle. You can now build up to 18 stories, all wood. So that's kind of opened up the market, but then it's, the manufacturing and infrastructure to deliver that is going to take a while to build out. And it's been concentrated in Canada, Pacific Northwest, a few in like the US South, but it really needs to become a regional thing. Like it started with Europe was supplying the entire world with mass timber, and they got really good at that, like shipping internationally. But it kind of misses the point, half the point of mass timber. Like, sure, you can source, California's been building a lot of mass timber buildings. It's good because it does reduce the embodied carbon of the projects. But the other half of it is creating benefits for your local forest and local, like, rural workforce, local economies. And if you're sourcing it from Europe, none of that's happening. So as it moves forward, and as the industry takes up mass timber, it should become more regional, and there'll just be regional producers that source locally. And that's our goal.
I have a question. This is Rashawn, and I'm logged in. I'm currently living in a house that has, if I could show you this room that I'm in, mass timber is in this room supporting beams. So my husband was an architect.
Cool.
I don't know if you can see it, but there it is. I don't know, I'm kind of off.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can kind of see it.
Yeah, so that's mass timber.
Have folks been in the Portland airport?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big mass timber structure. Like the rebuilding of the Portland airport was done with mass timber and mostly locally sourced. I mean, there's kind of, there's a lot of sort of explanation if you go in the Portland airport of where it all came from. They have some like educational panels. Anyway, it's a cool place to see a a fairly large mass timber project in the US.
That one's massive.
It's massive.
It's one of the biggest in the world.
It kind of blows you away when you walk in if you're yeah. Anyway, give it a shot. I would go into the Portland airport just to go into the airport. It's the only airport I'll say that about. It's spectacular. And almost all of it was sourced from Oregon, so kind of fulfills what George is talking about, like with more locally sourced, not shipped across the world, which I think is the other element that kind of contradicts some of the mass timber logic, is if you're shipping it distances, then you're adding carbon to the footprint of that building.
Yeah. So when I talked to George, he was talking about the future, wanted to talk about the future trends of the industry, and you're at the heart of the education and young people interested in entering this industry. Like, where do you see things, where's the interest lie with your students?
Well, I don't want to speak for them, but I would say that the most, a lot of our students, so we have 264 forestry students right now. We have another 40 students at the moment in something called applied fire science. And applied fire science is really, it spun off of forestry to focus primarily on how you do, how you prepare communities for fires, how you reintegrate fire into the ecosystem. But even within forestry, we have a bunch of concentrations, and the biggest one is fire. So I think of those 264 students, something like 80 are doing a concentration in fire management. And I hear you talking about fuels reduction, like students see fire, they're growing up in a generation where it's part of their reality and sort of their risk assessment of where they're living and what they think about when they think about their communities. And so I think that, reducing the risk of fire and also seeing fire as an ecological process is a huge part of, like as an important process, is a huge part of what our students think about. Our department has tried to, I think, we try and teach students all kinds of aspects of forestry. It's really hard. We've always said it's multidisciplinary, and it's never been more multidisciplinary than now. I go to a meeting with some forest managers, and they'll say why don't you have this specific class? I'll go to a meeting with somebody else. It's why don't you have a specific class in carbon accounting? Or, there's so many things in forestry that are necessary to be a forester. Everything from, we try and teach our students about roads and erosion and how to reduce erosion. And that's an important skill, but I really think that students are most interested in that fire forest nexus. And I don't know, you all can maybe, tell me how I'm wrong, but I also think that a lot of students are interested in how forestry can be a sort of, I guess, a management practice for good, in a sense. So we have a lot of students who come from kind of forestry families, logging families, or, they come from rural areas. And I think that sometimes, we tend to think of forestry as logging, but I really think that there's, like, amongst all of them, this idea that forestry can be done in a conscientious way, whether it's because, like, local forest products are really, kind of the best building material, or because I think actively managing forests is seen as something that's really beneficial for most landscapes. Even if you go up to, like, the national parks here, which we think of national parks as, like, you put a fence around it and then you just don't manage it. Those national parks are having these massive restoration projects because they were logged, replanted as plantations. They're too dense. They are, so we're sort of, they have really poor roads built into them, where basically they used tumbled crossings and dug, and buried streams. So, I guess that's a really long way of saying it. I think that a lot of students are going into forestry because they see problems, and and hopefully forestry has some solutions or some ideas to give students tools to tackle these big problems. And I'll also say that, I guess as a final note, we're in Northern California. There's a lot of tribes up here, and a lot of knowledge about how to manage that's a lot older than what I think is kind of modern forestry. And so I think forestry is also doing a lot of learning. So some of the burning is also cultural burning and learning how to use fire in a way that brings back a lot of different objectives.
On that note, do you have like a percentage or idea of students that are into timber or non-timber forest products? Like, is that a thing?
It's a really good question. Yeah. It's something that I've tried to, I don't know how to exactly to incorporate it into the curriculum, but we do get a lot of students who are interested in, yes, we do get a lot of students. I would say that we're not super strong in terms of, we have a class called agroforestry. We've had a hard time getting that off the ground a little bit, so okay, yeah. So the students are interested in that, and I think we're gonna try and more meaningfully incorporate that into the curriculum. But I went to forestry school at Oregon State, and I would say that forestry was taught as Douglas fir plantations, and the idea of sort of using non-timber forest products was seen as, it was seen as sort of this, like, sure, it's a kind of niche side thing. Some people are into mushrooms or something like that, or you can collect salal. I don't think it was taken super seriously, but I think that students are into it, and I'd love to see more momentum kind of from that ground up. I think as faculty, maybe we're slow to learn how to meaningfully incorporate it, but I see a lot from the students, more than from us. They're nodding.
A question, and this is, are there designations for areas of forest? Do you know this area of forest is at risk for fire, and this is why? It's drought, it's a lack of biodiversity. Do you have in forestry, are those criteria and designations for forests and ways to then come back and look at a piece of forest later and say, now this one isn't as at risk? Are those like drought, soil pH, drainage, like those criteria of what makes an area of forest more at risk for fire? Or is it just kind of general, like we have a drought in the whole area is at risk?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you, you might want to answer this too. I mean, because you have a mill in Weaverville, so it's like, I would say that a lot of people, the best knowledge I know exists with people like in fire safe councils or people who kind of work on, there are these great, there are lots of models. if you're asking about that, lots of maps you can get from like the Forest Service that indicate some sort of level of both risk and then, you know, potential for impacts to different resources. I would say that CAL FIRE has some good models, interactive maps that you can look at. I think that the best resource, though, is community wildfire protection plans or going to fire safe councils where they really work with folks to not just model from a kind of climatic perspective or, you know, there's lots of maps, Mid-Klamath Watershed Council makes maps where they show reburn. So like how often have places burned? You can get risk from that because as places burn, maybe that fuel's reduced, but there's also regrowth. So there's lots of maps like that, but I think the best resources are always when you get a lot of people together to actually like combine expertise. And fire safe councils are where I see that happening a lot in California.
What about, and then but like nutrient deficiencies, like do we know, you know, redwoods that aren't doing enough of this are more prone to burning?
It's an interesting question. I don't know about nutrient deficiencies in particular. I mean, the risks that I'm more familiar with in terms of like that forest health perspective would be like insects and disease mapping. And the Sierras have a lot more of that. Redwoods, to my knowledge, redwoods haven't had that. You know, there are redwoods that are, you know, might be at risk from like larger fires, but I think that redwoods burn well and are often benefited by a fire. And I say that not as a fire ecologist, but I'll just say that my colleague Jeff Candy, who's a fire ecologist, is like, yeah, redwoods burn, they carry fire well. But in terms of that health perspective, like whether there's a nutrient deficiency, I'm not familiar with anything like that. I will say we have a soil scientist who's really into what happens when soils burn and they release metals, which is something I had never thought of. There's kind of this like combination of serpentine soils, certain heavy metals that get released from fire, which I'd never thought of, and then can leach into waterways. But that's a really different question than what you're asking.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something I'm interested in.
It's an interesting soil science question.
Right.
I haven't heard of nutrient deficiencies. I have heard of change. I mean, because of climate change, there are changing fog patterns, and I think that could have long-term impacts to redwoods.
Yeah.
But
probably the water resource is what drives a lot of the forest health. So if you have too many trees competing for the same amount of water, then they're going to start dying. Like up in like the road area, there's a big Douglas fir mortality event happening. And I don't know, like how, if it was just they saw that all, you know, half the hillside's brown now, or if there was some sort of prediction to see it coming.
Yeah, so I've read that iron deficiency can make the trees less drought tolerant. And so I have a project or something I want to study with that. But,
cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I probably am not the right person, but the models I'm familiar with, and we're like what George was talking about, like you can have a bunch of trees die. It's usually retroactive, right?
Yeah.
You're doing a after the fact analysis of why it happened. But our arborists are really good at doing that kind of tree by tree assessment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
Is your product like a engineered wood product, or is it?
Yeah.
Does it use glue?
It will, just for the finger joints, to get to longer lengths, but we don't have a finger joiner yet, so.
Do you have to?
Yeah, for now it's just dowel connections, like through
really
the width of a 2x6 or 2x4 to 2x12, and drill holes through them and use a hardwood dowel.
Do you have to pay extra sales tax for that engineered? Is there like a special extra sales tax for engineered wood products?
I'm not sure. We haven't sold anything yet, actually. It's coming up soon.
Yeah, he was just telling me
a lot of
that.
donations.
But you've got your first project in Washington,
Yeah.
like this summer, so
That's exciting.
it's happening.
Yeah.
So did you import your equipment from Europe to
That's the standard route. We're actually building our own sort of drilling and dowel press because there was only one manufacturer in the world that we could find in Switzerland, and they build one machine every 3 years. So they're building one going to Australia right now, and we might get it because it is like a fully automated, nice solution, but we've got a pretty good millwright team and fab shop. So, pneumatic compression table and just a special drill to drill really deep, and then, just another thing to ram dowels in. It's not rocket science, but it's taking time to build, but we're about to commission it and see how it works.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd be building machines.
So along those lines, I mean, there's some folks here that are doing innovative and new businesses that will require a large investment. Any advice for those people?
And the way I'm going about it is finding like the simplest way to start that also allows you to scale up like over time instead of just making a huge investment. And sometimes you just have to, especially if it's like buying a piece of equipment to work out in the woods. But when you're looking at like a manufacturing process, hopefully you can find a way to start small. And CLT was an issue. Like CLT is the 90% of the mass timber panel market. Just the Europeans kind of set that standard, so everybody just goes to CLT, but it's really hard to make one CLT panel. And it's even harder to just make a small, pilot scale production. So everyone just has to go in and drop, at least $50 million to set up a facility, and that's on the low end. And so you're taking a huge risk, and then you have to sell every product before you make it. And usually it's working with a project team for 2 years while they design and get the project entitled. So it's, not a risk that we wanted to jump into. So I looked around for a while and found dowel laminated timber, and it's like, well, we started just with like a jig and a long, buying long augers online, looking up like a drill guide, and we're just, we're making DLT. We can make different panels with different species and kind of get an understanding for the process, and then we can build our own equipment. And eventually, like our first big step will be buying a finger joiner just to get to the longer panel lengths that the market is looking for. But at least we know, okay, we can make DLT, and then we're going into like a commercially viable technology, which is the finger joining system. Yeah, it's still a few $1 million, but we're not going in blind and then scrambling to build the business around these pieces of equipment. So if there's anywhere you can find ways to just start small, get proof of concept. Everyone wants to see your product before they buy it, and no one wants to be the first. Everyone wants to see that you can make it consistently before you buy it. So it's another tricky part.
Is it a continuous dowel, or is it they're offset?
They're staggered. It limits out about 30 inches in the dowel length.
What kind of materials are you starting with? Is it like a tree of a certain diameter, or are you like building the beams through lamination and other processes? What are you starting with? And also, how are you tracking where that wood is coming from? You guys are talking about timber pads and stuff, and what does that side of the business look like?
The tracking is definitely an important part that we're going to need to build out more. That's a huge industry topic for mass timber, is like chain of custody and knowing where the wood that's in the building came from. Like the Portland Airport project was that was the whole point of the project. It does take a lot of extra work, and it's still, I think the industry is trying to figure out like where's the value? At least the producers, the consumers want that, but it's a lot of extra work to segregate logs through a sawmill and then all the way through to secondary manufacturing and track that. In some configurations, it's not possible if you don't have space. But if it's possible, it's a lot of extra work, so who's going to pay for that? Everyone's already trying to get things cheaper than they are. So that's something that we're going to be working through, and hopefully through our vertical integration with the Schmidbauer mills, we'll have an advantage for that, and I see that there's ways to do it, but even when I bring it up with our log yard teams, they just shake their heads and don't want to think about it. Sort of like, sure, but who's going to cover that cost?
Are you thinking of sourcing FSC is already built to do that chain of custody? Is that outside of what you want to do? Because,
yeah, that's one layer, and it's that's like a mix where logs can come in to a facility and then they get mixed in, and you're not getting necessarily that material.
So you're saying more specific, like this came from this place?
That's what people are wanting.
Okay.
And that's sort of like the gold standard if you can pull it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's usually not possible. You have to be vertically integrated or have like a really good relationship with the sawmill to convince them to do that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing what you meant with tree tag, like following, I don't know, he left, but like following it through the whole process from origin to...
Well, we were talking about that yesterday, I think, and you guys were saying that it was hard to actually buy timber, right? Or like buy the small diameter trees, and they're having to track where that's coming from, so that when I can't speak for you guys, but we'll have to wait for Bodie to come back. I was thinking of a conversation that we had, because I guess if for them, they're not a private landowner where they own those trees. So if they're doing a land clearing company trying to get small diameter trees used as poles, you go onto someone else's land and clear, then you can't, I don't know if you can directly use the logs that you take, because there's a tracking process involved, and that's at least how I understood it, but I think Bodie's coming back and can speak more.
Yeah, well, you have to have a timber harvest plan, or a forest fire prevention exemption, or there's all these other different paths that you can go to just show that you're harvesting legally.
Yes, right. Yeah, and that's unique to California in some ways, at least that structure, the timber harvest plan and exemption structure. I don't know how many people are running into that, but there is a problem with, I don't know if it's a problem. If you're trying to harvest trees in any way that's commercial, you do have to work within the forest practice rules. Mm-hmm. And that does suddenly put you into a regulatory environment that's quite different from other states if you were doing projects. So the forest practice rules are something that I teach students about. I don't know if it's their favorite subject, but it's a large book, and I think that a lot of the rules were built up to prevent like excesses, they were built in response to like a lot of forest practices that happened that caused a lot of damage. And then I think at some point people started pivoting, like the forest fire exemptions, people started pivoting to how do we make the rules a little bit less onerous so that people can do more work.
Yeah, well,
like
and now I think like a lot of byproducts of other processes where if you're doing land clearing, you have a bunch of wood chips and maybe like big logs that could be used for inoculating mushrooms and then doing erosion control. So there's kind of the like a cyclical economy that I think is lacking in forestry, but has the potential to be there because regulations stand in the way of using some of the materials coming out of like large land clearing project just because there isn't a timber harvest plan in place, or like maybe the company doesn't own that land, or there seems to be some caution tape that is totally warranted, but also maybe in the way of building out these the secondary uses of some of these timber materials that would make land clearing and mycology, the partnerships more viable
It's kind of easier to
for
get
building.
legally harvested logs for bigger projects.
Yeah.
But it's like when a landowner that has like 200 acres or something like that wants to harvest off their land and give the logs to us, they can't do it because they don't have all this paperwork filed.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have somebody to sign off. That's the expense too. Like they don't have the paperwork and they don't have the money to pay up front for an RPF.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is often the
It costs
cost.
them money to give the logs away.
Yeah, it's an upfront, yeah.
How much is it, do you just
Could be tens of thousands of
for a
dollars.
small landowner?
It just kind of depends. A lot of this depends on what you're, like if you can get an exemption, there's certain exemptions that are gonna make it a lot easier. A THP is a lot if you want a timber harvest plan. I mean, that's $40,000-$50,000, but that's one extreme. That's, a lot of people are doing exemptions if you're doing these smaller projects. So it's much less, I don't want to give an estimate because I'm not totally sure, and some of these would be offset by cost share programs also. So I think it gets more affordable, it's just, it is a lot of bureaucracy, probably is what you're saying.
Yeah, maybe you could help us.
Are you aware of any cost sharing programs?
Remove those barriers.
There are, sorry, what's that?
Are you aware of any cost sharing programs for that specifically, for small landowners trying to clear land?
Yeah.
Small being like 200 acres.
Yeah, well, there's the CFIP program. Are you all familiar? I see you guys at least nodding. California Forest Improvement Program. And then NRCS has the EQIP. You know, honestly, NRCS, I'm not sure what's going on right now with EQIP, but CFIP has been a really active program, and like California has invested a lot of money into trying to make fuels reduction at least work. I don't know what you were doing, restoration projects, right? Like
Yeah.
fuels reduction.
We do CFIP and equip and all that, yeah.
Yeah.
But also, the RCDs sometimes will have programs for
Oh, yeah.
free forest plans and
The resource conservation district that's in your county, or any county or one you work with.
And RCDs are great places to also like kind of convene a lot of those people around. Like if you have a bunch of people who are running into the same problems, I feel like RCDs are a great place to go. They work with small landowners all the time.
So we could just like, yes, if we have a landowner with a small amount of acres, relatively small, we can just like refer them to the RCD and then they can get them set up, and then we can that would probably be the easiest route.
Yeah, you could connect them to the RCD and facilitate that partnership, and then even help them procure a CFIP grant to, pay for the costs of clearing off small trees from their land or something. But you might have to do the hand holding through those processes, because I think the landowner is the main character in that story. And I know some land clearing companies and stuff, I don't know how you do it, but they'll help a landowner get funding and then do the work that funding is meant for. Because a lot of landowners, it's a big process for them to navigate. So if you as a business can understand it and help them get through it faster, then that funding's available.
For sure.
There's a program run by what used to be called the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And now it's a different name, which I forget. Joe might know more about this. But what they're doing, they've got, I think, 6 pilot programs through the state where they're trying to do biomass aggregation projects. And so the idea is, how do you coordinate biomass small diameter timber use in a given area? Because now it's a small landowner for 5-10 acres and they want to get cleared, they can't go through the whole process. But if you take 20 small landowners and pull them all together, then it becomes more reasonable. So there are two approaches that they're taking to this. One is to set up aggregation facilities, a yard, where material can be brought. And that makes it easier for the people producing it because they know they have a market where they can take it and sell it. And then buyers can buy from that yard. But the other approach they're taking is to develop software programs that will pull together all the different players. So small landowners, the timber operators, the foresters, the local regulatory agencies. So everyone can see on this program what's going on, and you can pull together 20, 30 different small projects together into one large project. So this is pilot programs that they're conducting now. The guy in the state, his name is Michael McGuire, and those hold a lot of promise, but they're not being enacted yet.
Yeah, there's some, I feel like it's a problem that people are aware of. That's cool to hear about these pilot projects. And I guess over in Quincy, you guys, I mean, there's a lot of people trying to innovate how to utilize burned wood and, like restoration byproducts in all kinds of ways. But I feel like a lot of the, I always think of like going local, like going to RCDs, working with neighbors. Even if there's not a pilot project, it can work. There was a project in, a watershed that is nearby. Well, it actually was in several watersheds, but a bunch of landowners got together. They worked with different agencies, and they worked with land trusts, so local nonprofits who actually applied for some of the grants, and they were able to combine some funds together from Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service contributed funds, and at any rate, sometimes it's like those land trusts, those nonprofits, where they can actually get the landowners together, apply for funds, and sort of do some of the, help facilitate some of the work. But I really think that it's a matter of like getting a bunch of people who have a good idea, and the skill there is grant writing. It's not necessarily forestry. And in that case, I can give you more detail if I have a little bit of time. I hadn't thought of that example in a while, but it was kind of neat because they kind of did something like that, but at a local level, where they got the landowners together. They got some folks who could write some grants, basically, and they applied for a bunch of funds so that they could, and in this case, it was oak woodland restoration, do a bunch of fuels reduction and some prescribed fire on the landscape.
In which case, you've got to have people who know grant writing, who have the time, the ability to do all that, pull all that together.
Totally, yeah. And that's, in this case, it was land trust that kind of helped coordinate. And actually, it was UC Extension in that case, too. If you have extension agents nearby, they're often wonderful for working with small landowners. I mean, again, all these resources are sort of near resource conservation districts, UC Extension, local land trusts. They all want to work with landowners and get over this scale problem.
So you're saying land trusts and UC extensions have grant writers that they work, that are involved with them?
Yeah, they do. I don't know if they would call themselves grant writers, but they're people who know how to write and can write grants. Land trusts always, if you work with a land trust that has any level of staff, they know how to write grants. That's what they do. They're soft money funded. Yeah, and if a bunch of landowners have this need, I think that that's a great resource.
Yeah, so I'm curious, so you're, George, you're like kind of the cutting edge of some new technology. I'm sure you would love like skilled employees. And you're have a whole pool of younger, energetic people in the industry. So kind of I'm asking this question from an entrepreneurial, where's the opportunity angle. So like some of your students will end up getting jobs at existing businesses, and I imagine some start their own businesses. And for you, you're looking for employees, but also I'm sure there's like support businesses that help your business grow. So in general, where do you see, like if someone has an entrepreneurial spirit and wants to be in the industry, where are some of the trends and where are some of the opportunities?
It's a big supply chain. There's a lot, from in the woods, supply chain, and forestry, which is, traditional, I think, what Cal Poly is good at producing people with knowledge in. And there's sawmill workers, which don't require a ton of specialty training, but more like career development on the job. And the mass timber side it's a lot more technology focused, sort of a mix of technology, automation engineers, electrical engineering, robotics, and also like traditional timber framing and construction knowledge, which there's not very many timber framers in California, surprisingly. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a timber framer.
Oh yeah?
Oh, good. Cool.
We should talk. Yeah, Google doesn't show many around here, so. So yeah, it's a hard, I don't know if it applies to this group so much, but fabrication is one component that would be nice for like just a scaled mass timber producer. And by fabrication, I mean doing all the custom like penetrations and sort of like timber framing work on the panels according to the shop drawings before they go to the job site. Everything needs to be like perfectly dimensioned, and there's a pipe going through right here. It needs to be drilled, a hole drilled through at the exact location. That can typically be a bottleneck, especially if you're just trying to produce product. And that could be hand done by timber framers with tools, or with a CNC, like a robot like the size of like this table area or bigger, that just moves over the top of these products and grabs tools. And so that's, you need a software engineer and robotics experience. But that is a industry bottleneck at the moment.
Cool.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Can I ask a question? Is your goal to, this is for George, is that his name?
Yeah.
George. Are you thinking of doing prefabricated cabins?
That is cabins, or just like affordable by design housing kits is a really cool concept.
Have you ever heard of barn dominiums?
Yeah.
That's like kind of that idea.
That's definitely something that I'd like to do. And we got a grant, actually. We were just awarded, so we haven't started working on it, to hire an architect to come in here into like the Redwood region, hold community meetings and sort of figure out what the housing needs are. And then come up with like, okay, we need, I'm just guessing, like an ADU, like a 2-bedroom house and a 4-bedroom house. And then they'll come back to me as the manufacturer and design like a kit of parts with conventional lumber and DLT panels. So it can be completely locally sourced and like flat packed and sent up to rural areas. And then hopefully it's a cost-effective solution. That's, you don't know until you go through it, but they could be pre-permanent designs. So that's an initiative that is really exciting, but from a producer standpoint, it's a lot of work to go through any project. Just as much work for someone's house as it is for a 100,000 square foot building. I mean, it's a little bit more work, but so it's hard for me at this point to spend too much time and energy. That's why I applied for a grant for it. Because it would just be a lot of money and energy trying to develop this market that is, might or might not work out very well. And if it does, it's going to be really small volume of product. So everyone, the whole mass timber industry is just going for the airports, the Google headquarters, the state buildings, like, because that's what you have to do. If you're trying to build ADUs, then you're just gonna be stuck really small and you're not gonna be having economic and forest health impacts. But there's a place for both of those.
Where did that grant come from?
The California Jobs First. Yeah, they were just announced.
Yeah, so opportunities for students or entrepreneurship, do you see any trends?
I think that a lot of our students do go work for someone else. I think of that more typically right out of school. So I like this question because it makes me think that maybe we should be teaching more entrepreneur, like.
Hey, we'd love to help.
I think that, for one thing, there's just a huge amount of demand for foresters right now, and so it's really hard to, our students tend to get, I think of it as they get snatched up, like they get a lot of job offers. But I think in terms of entrepreneurship, I think that it's something that maybe students could pursue in tandem with getting these jobs elsewhere, because I don't know how people, I think it's just incredibly impressive to put yourself on the line and to go out and to try this without working for kind of someone else, which is kind of the traditional model. Is like our students graduate, they go to Forest Service or Green Diamond, now maybe PG&E, carbon company, something like that. They go to work for tribes, but they're usually working for someone. And I think that the most common entrepreneurs are going to be like consulting foresters. So basically they get their RPF and they become a forester to these smaller landowners who then, hire them to work with them on projects. But even that is usually an apprenticeship relationship. So they go in and they work with a consulting forester who's established, and maybe at some point they can kind of go on their own. I will say an interesting avenue that's opened up that's not related necessarily to what you all have been saying, but is like cannabis growers, as they come into regulation, into the regulatory system, have been finding that a lot of the upgrades that they need on their land have to do with forestry, things that foresters know about, like road upgrades. And so that's been a surprising thing to me, is having students who basically go to work more for cannabis growers than for timber producers in some places, depending on geography, because some of our graduates know a lot about like culvert replacement and stuff like that, and how to bring folks into compliance for that. Yeah, but I feel like sort of the small, like cone collection, which I think was you said cone collection?
Yeah, me and Ruby both do cone collection.
Okay. I mean, how did you get into that?
I knew a guy that knew Ruby's uncle and kind of found my way into it.
Cool.
Yeah.
And is it cone collection for nursery purposes?
Yeah, so we do contracts with CAL FIRE, Forest Service, private logging. I've actually worked with Trinity River Lumber Company. I've done some collection for them, dug for collections out in that area. It's like SPI is like a big client of ours. SPI has been like kind of keeping their seeds, so then like these smaller groups that used to buy seed from them are now like hiring, and they're like, who do you go through? And they're like, you go through this company, and so
yeah.
And then the seeds get, anyone we're working for either has their own seed processing facility or works with someone who has a seed processing facility connected to a seed bank, and will process the seeds, bank the seeds, and then start growing them to reseed after forest fire or logging.
Well, that is, so nurseries, I guess, that's a potential growth area, and I think also nurseries that can, it's interesting, do you find that people are asking for different species, like for restoration projects, or is it kind of like all the same?
It kind of depends. A lot of what we do, I feel like, we do like a lot of duck fir, incense cedar, like red fir, white fir, all sorts of pine species. I don't know, it's a lot of merchantable timber is what they're looking for. It's like
they're not necessarily looking for.
It's a variety. It depends. Like for Sierra cone specifically, they are doing more traditional timber species. But also, we did a collection last year doing lodgepole and mountain hemlock, because there was a forest fire around South Lake Tahoe, and those trees grow down there, and they were just wanting to reforest the hillside around areas that have recreation and stuff. So those were not necessarily timber related. And then there's
I collected foxtail pine.
Foxtail pine.
Foxtail's neat.
So
Yeah.
sometimes there's these
lodgepole, I think,
satellite
keep it
collections that are for habitat restoration and ecological purposes. A lot of it is timber related, and then also it's year by year. So whichever species produce the most, we tend to collect those, just because they're going after the wild seed and quantity. And then there's organizations like Ancient Forest Society, which is a nonprofit, and they're specifically looking at giant sequoias and now sugar pine and the like older trees. And
Yeah, and that's all,
yeah.
because I work with them doing collection and research climbing, and yeah, that's all just like genetic preservation. It's like mostly what they're doing, and they are starting to plant in Sequoia National Park, and so they are taking some of that seed and replanting some of these groves, but mostly they're just trying to like bank as much, you know, giant sequoia seed as possible, so they have it in case fire comes through. Just as like genetic preservation.
Wow. All right. Would you guys like to learn like an entrepreneurial skill of seed?
I would.
I mean, I would not say that that's something that like that we teach very well, but I love this idea because it's a huge value, and there's a ton of research, of course, in terms of like species, but also moving species. You know, like there's a lot of like
not like
what
assisted migration.
Yeah, and whether it's worthwhile or whether it's kind of, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think most of the people doing the climbing are not doing anything related to a college degree. Like I went to college, but it doesn't pertain to climbing trees per se. I studied communication, Spanish, so it wasn't instrumental in me getting to that point. But working with Ancient Forest Society, like the two people that run those programs and climb the trees, and we're just they just climbed the General Sherman, which is like the first people ever to be like documented climbing it, and their PhD, you know, out of Berkeley, and doing a lot of research with Berkeley, and so that's very academic, and so I think there's a range. And then there's some of the people we're working with at Cal Fire, a friend Spencer who's been working with them. He's studying right now to pass the RPF test and become a registered professional forester. So I think there's, you know, people taking more circuitous routes into forestry through like entry-level jobs as ground crew and climbers and that kind of thing. So
cool.
Can you be a registered forester without a 4-year degree?
Yeah, you can. I mean, it's you need 7 years of experience, whatever that looks like, usually under an RPF or an equivalent to an RPF, they say, if you work like in a field where there's not RPFs, like for the federal agencies. So 7 years of experience can come from like working with a consulting forester, and you don't have to have a degree. I mean, it's a test. I always tell my students, like, it really doesn't test whether you're a good forester, it tests whether you're good at taking tests, which is unfortunate, but they are actually coming up with a new way to take the RPF exam, which is going to be a little bit more experience-based. I can't promise that it's going to happen, but that's a proposal. But it is kind of like I would describe it as it can be an apprenticeship.
Okay.
Yeah, but 7 years. So a 4-year degree gets you 4 years on your way.
Okay.
I have a question. What kind of niches in forestry that aren't currently being offered at Cal Poly like really excite you, and you feel like there could be more room for growth as I guess in the education, but then also to go outward into the forestry industry?
That don't exist?
Yeah, that don't,
Yeah.
at least in Humboldt or, you know.
Yeah. Well, agroforestry, which I do think is really cool and could look very different based on where you are. I think there's a lot more development of agroforestry in certain geographies. It hasn't been explored a lot here. And then probably one of our weaknesses is genetics. Like, so that's why I'm really interested in this cone collection. Like, we have research on it. We don't have actual classes on forest genetics.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed, because the majority of foresters that we work with are Cal Poly graduates.
Yeah.
Where I feel like it's like 75%. I'm like, oh, I live in Arcata, and they're like, oh, I went to Humboldt State or Cal Poly. And then we have a lot of issues sometimes with some working with foresters. They just don't understand the exact process. And
I never learned about cones and
they're like,
cycle.
we know that we learned that you have to collect the cones, but specifically how we're doing it in climbing and what we need to be efficient in collections is something that I've noticed lacking in any, even if they're not coming from Humboldt, coming from other schools, it's not. It can be really frustrating sometimes because they just don't really understand what we're trying to do, and then you're trying to explain the specific process while you're in the field.
And there's a lot of surveying and monitoring that leads up to the collection process. So going out into the forest with binoculars and looking at cones and looking at bug activity and with sugar pine specifically looking for rust in the trees, because we try and collect rust-resistant sugar pine for those genetics. And that's all work that falls on the forester ahead of time before we come out. Yeah. The guy, my uncle, Robert, he's actually come up to Cal Poly a number of times to speak, but he graduated from Cal Poly in woodworking, so he comes up and talks to them about woodworking. And if he's ever up here for that, you can talk to the forestry program about cone collection too.
Program? Woodworking? Or is that sort of, something I was going to say, which is kind of adjacent opportunities.
Sure.
Not forestry, but wood products.
Which is where you went to school and came out doing woodworking.
The makerspace that's been around but being expanded, I think, can be a great opportunity for entrepreneurs to understand, because there's so much material here, and even if there's issues getting it from small landowners, it's come to your local sawmill and there's a ton of mountains of scrap material in solid form and chips and sawdust, and it's the industry overall just needs a lot of creativity to figure out how do we use this resource and turn it into a product. And I think there'll be more opportunities with the tariffs going around, and plastic and steel and all these other materials are going to become a lot more expensive. And everybody likes wood at the end of the day. The only reason they don't like it is because they think you're cutting down the forest. So it's kind of a cultural, educational shift we need to have in the US, where in Europe everybody knows. It's everybody knows wood is good, it's sort of baseline, it's sustainably harvested, it's just ingrained in the culture. And so people that are working in wood products are have a lot of pride in it, and it's, everybody respects them for it. But here it's kind of been pushed to the side, and for good reason, with the overlogging back in the day, but things have shifted so far the other direction. Now we're dealing with too much material, but the perceptions haven't changed yet. So I think we all kind of have that responsibility to educate the public, and I always say we need a Netflix documentary to get out there and set the story straight. But yeah, maker spaces and learning. I wish I knew how to work with CNCs and robots. I've got a guy from the maker space that's helping me. But you can just turn, whatever scrap wood into a product. Press start and it'll work all night.
Sell earrings on Etsy.
Yeah. There's two good things there that I think are potentials. One is wood engineering is a field. And potentially could come to Cal Poly, Humboldt. We have mechanical engineering, which is kind of getting at that makerspace stuff. But wood engineering can be a little bit more specific. Maybe it could become a part of mechanical engineering. That's my hope. But the other thing that you mentioned is that people work in the woods and are proud. And I actually just had a grad student I was on our committee who was looking at the logging workforce, and this might not. The logging workforce is aging, and it's something where that's not necessarily a 4-year degree, but that is a hugely important part of any of this, and it's really gonna struggle potentially. You know, there's both changes happening where you need people who are like competent at doing more restoration style logging and like different types of logging, but there's also just like a lot of upfront costs. Like, you know, they need equipment, and so people are avoiding the industry. So it was something that she was looking at, was just sort of, what are the trends? Do we have enough loggers? And it was a sort of baseline study, that a big part that she found is that it's aging.
When you say loggers, you mean like sawyers and fellers and people trucking the logs?
It was, yeah, she was looking at sort of the whole range, but mostly she was looking at LTOs. So LTOs can range from, I'm not very good at the licensing, it's like A to C. A is like big, C is small, but kind of throughout it, there was an aging. But lots of people coming in, there are a lot of new licenses being created for LTOs, but that tends to be at the C level, I guess, at the smaller scales.
What about robotics? I mean, we've had students that are designing different robots and forest, yeah. How do you see?
Robots?
Yeah, forest robots. Forest robots.
I don't know, you were at FSI, right? The Cal Forest meeting? Maybe not.
No, I didn't make this here.
There was a guy there with forest robots, you know, I think it's an interesting, sure. I mean, I always am a little wary of like mechanization is gonna not create, or it's gonna create different jobs.
Yeah.
It'll create jobs for people who are good with robots. I kind of think it's neat that California actually still has a lot of people on the ground working in the woods. I think that's something that's a cool part of
the
California.
terrain makes it
Yeah, the
hard.
terrain's hard.
We have a lot of steep terrain.
But I mean, so does New Zealand. They're getting more and more.
They have a lot of robotics.
They're getting more. It's, anyway.
Yeah, I have certain ideas about like getting the limbs off the trees, like I want to do a caterpillar robot that has saws on it to take limbs off.
Yeah.
Go around the tree and take limbs off.
You're not the first person. So,
there's a capstone class.
exactly. Our capstone, one of our senior capstone groups in the engineering department, not mine, but did a project like that, designing a robot that would prune.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was for pruning.
So that's funny that you're saying that.
But also, we want to do like harvesting trials where there's a company called Rosenthal Fire Mitigation, and they have their sort of patented cable logging system where they drag trees up and, you know, they leave the limbs on and start low impact logging. Mm-hmm. But we also would like to have it so that there's forest restoration materials going back on the return trip of the cable, you know, so that the forest restoration crews are nearby or at least the materials are going in for them to do the, you know, gully restoration projects and things like that at the same time, you know. Because that's the big part of the work of gully restoration is getting the materials there. It's hard work.
So there's a load up and on the back, is that what you're saying? Like it's, nice.
Yeah. So that could put a better face on logging, you know, get the restoration crews in there at the same time, you know, to get more people interested in removing trees that need to be removed. Yeah.
All right, so as promised, the hour went by fast. And I'm wondering if there's any, you know, any thoughts that you didn't have a chance to express, or, you know, sage words of wisdom, or?
I just reiterate that I think, you know, it's a really valuable resource that we have, and it's kind of been pushed to the wayside over the past few decades, but it's definitely coming back, and kind of fueled by the wildfires and need to mitigate those and increase forest health. But yeah, I mean, I feel lucky to be stepping into it at a young age where finally policymakers, environmentalists, and timber guys are all like coming to the same conclusions and working together. We're talking to my dad or grandfather. It's like they still don't have any hope for it, but they're, you know, stuck a little jaded. So, yeah, I think it's gonna continue to be a growing industry with lots of opportunities, and it's not something that can be outsourced very well. Like, all these other material supply chains are getting hit really hard in the next couple of years with tariffs, and timber is always going to be sourced here for California. So I think if we just need to
George, can you repeat the name of your company?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the name of your company?
Mad River Mass Timber. We should pop up on a Google search.
Yeah.
I do think that, I don't know if this is wise words. I really appreciated people having all these different ideas. I think that the idea of sourcing products locally it's worked really well in some industries, like farm to table type stuff. And I don't know that it has been explored as much, or it has been as successful in forestry. But I do think that some of that cultural shift is happening, where people see wood products locally as an important part of the forest and forest management. And one of the projects I'll mention is, I mentioned it briefly, was the restoration going on in the national parks, national and state parks, Redwood National and State Parks. And that's called Redwoods Rising. So there's multiple partners. One is Save the Redwoods League, which is a nonprofit, and they bring the funds. The California State and National Parks are the landowner. I participate basically by hiring students to do monitoring. So I've kind of been, watching the project from the outside. But what I think is really cool about that project is it's logging that's happening in national and state forests that has a particular objective to meet, which is like over time to grow bigger, older trees, kind of like in the community forest. But it's really, I think it's been a sort of change in how Save the Redwoods League thinks about forestry. Is like, yeah, we need to kind of use some of the same skills and equipment that we used to log these forests in the first place to like change the dynamics of these forests to help, get a lot of habitat back that was lost. And so I think for the students, it's been really neat because they get to watch each year of students gets to go and measure what's happened over time. We've had botany crews and all kinds of different crews, but forestry is always one of the crews, roads is always one of the crews. And that kind of restoration, some of that restoration is small scale, can be scaled down. A lot of private landowners want to create, they want to have different objectives on their land, but it also can be, can make money. And I think a good example of that, I saw you have a Riffy forest, like sticker on your bottle, Redwood Forest Foundation. There's a lot of models in California where people are trying to go onto some degraded landscapes, and Redwood Forest Foundation is a great example of that, where it's like, folks getting together to say like, yeah, these are degraded landscapes, but what can we learn from that and put forestry skills and logging skills to restore it. It's a sort of flipping the model.
Yeah,
I think California's an innovator in that. What's that?
Their terrain is so steep.
Yeah, it's steep. And they've had issues, they I'm sure could speak to some of the issues that they've had over time, but they're doing a really good job of for one thing, they hire a lot of our students, our graduates, to be foresters, but they've built up a forestry program. So I guess I think that forestry is changing, and I think it's really hopeful, and I really like having students here who maybe are interested in other aspects of forestry. But I don't know, I think that entrepreneurialism, I'll just leave with this, is not something we are necessarily thinking about with our students, and so it'd be wonderful to actually have you all talk about how you think about building a small business in the forest, because I think a lot of our students might get the impression that we are teaching them how to work for timber industry, and that is one aspect of what we teach, but there's a lot more, and so it's really cool to see you all doing this.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Let's give it up for our presenters. we got 45 minutes for lunch, so I do want to like cut it so we get back in time for government contracting. And we're not kicking you out, but I want to let people get some food. And thank you so much for showing up. I know it's a big deal on a Sunday to come and give your time.
My bike ride, I'm halfway through. So.
Oh, yeah? Okay, that's cool. That's great.
How do we get a hold of you?
Oh yeah, would you be interested in being on our contact sheet to send out to this class afterwards? I can get your either email and or phone, whatever you're comfortable with people contacting you through.
Email's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I might have yours just from having
I'll get
communicated via email before. Yeah.
So yeah, we have something, Bill is online right at 12:45, so please be back by that time. Are you guys going home, or what do you, yeah, okay. See you later.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when I was up there, they were still sort of doing that. Bye. Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah, we're actually, we're kind of trying to get, we're working with roundwood, one might consider the original mass timber.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's all
So,
sort of
like-
the same skills.
Is this something you built?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so basically trying to take forest thinnings and build fire-resistant homes.
That's cool. So,
Definitely, like, your guys' input on that grant project.
and you're working with the water?
So, you know, did you guys all?
Yeah.
Clark, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we're involved in this
That's great.
pilot that Jeff talked about, with PR and the whole, and the North Coast partnerships and stuff.
Oh, aggregation pilot.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, water center is great. I feel like they're one of those groups when you're talking about dirt riders. I was like, oh, water center. Any of these nonprofits, it sounds like you're talking about all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
We're just trying to, get all our pathways and
Yeah.
figure it out.
Well, Clark he was a grad student here. Yeah, there's a lot of good work going on in the Shots Energies. That is one that they have started, I mean, they're an energy research center, but they've started dabbling in wood supply chains because of biomass. But they also, what's that?
That's kind of what we're doing. Because of biomass, we're trying to use biomass.
Exactly. I mean, well, they were thinking of it from an energy perspective initially, but it's the same supply chain. But yeah, they're making a lot of models of where it exists and sort of how you can look at it and, how you can reduce costs, basically. So they might be something to look at. I mean, that's always the issue, right? Is like getting it out of.
Yeah, totally, you guys right now is intuitive to get into.
Anyway, nice to meet you. Yeah. Totally. I love it. This is something that.
But you run into the,
is like how do
you need to work in multiple aspects of the